From COP26 in Glasgow, I'm Will Saunders representing Scientists Warning Europe, and I'm here to discuss the psychology of the climate emergency with a great group. I'll introduce you to them now. So, we're here with
Dr. Amanda Clinton, Global Psychology Alliance.
Terry Morrissey, Global Psychology Alliance from Ireland.
And Richard Plenty from the Climate Psychology Alliance from UK.
Excellent. It's great to see you here, and it's great to see so many different aspects of the science at COP26. So, squeeze it all in. Joys of life is better. So, obviously, the science has been known and clear for many, many decades, yet we haven't seen the behaviour change or the policy actions that we need. I'd like to ask one of you, what do you think is one of the main reasons why we haven't seen that behaviour change?
Because I think it's sometimes people equate the climate crisis and the ask of changing behaviour as a sacrifice, and we really should be seeing it in a totally different light, seeing it as an opportunity to take a positive step to create well-being and a better life for people generally. I think a lot of what goes on at the moment in the current climate we're in is actually quite devastating, and to change behaviour for the better. What we're trying to do is convince people that it's a positive action, not a negative action.
So sustainability shouldn't be a sacrifice, right?
It doesn't have to be a sacrifice. You should welcome it with open arms.
Would you like to comment on that?
I'd like to mention that we've recently joined together 68 countries as a Global Psychology Alliance representing every continent on the world, short of Antarctica, and that we're making an effort to get the science of behavior change, whether it's organizational, whether it's individual, out to the world. And so we'd really like to share that the technology, the energy solutions here are phenomenal, but human beings need to be a critical piece of that. It's possible. It's possible.
Yeah, I just go to the original point and say that psychology teaches us that sometimes people take a while to change. They take the information in first, but until they really process it and really think it through, it takes a while for individuals, even societies sometimes, to get to the fact of that they can actually do something about it. And people often feel helpless at first, overwhelmed, feel it doesn't really affect them so much. And it's only when they realise the impact that they begin to think something is happening. So we'll see, of course, with all the climate that are going on, the climate emergencies, the crucial problems that we have, what we now see is people realising that this is real, it's not just theory, it affects them. And now what we need to do is to encourage action, to get people to take small steps to try things out. Once they, I did well on that one.
Nice one. Earlier, we know the science, act upon it. So, on an individual level, and I'll ask each of you this, what's one of the most important behaviour changes you would advise people do to try and fight the climate emergency?
Okay, maybe I'll start. I think there's an issue about asking individuals to change their behaviour. We need to look at systems and changing systems, and we're living in a whole series of complicated, interconnected systems. And we're looking at complicated organisations, we're looking at major conglomerates, we're looking at, say, the manufacture of concrete, all of that. So systems, we need to change the behaviour of systems. In terms of individuals, I think it's about not making people feel guilty for their behaviour, but rewarding positive behaviour. Because I think guilt doesn't motivate anybody to do anything. So, on an individual level, it's just maybe do less of the things that are damaging the climate, like eat less meat, fly less. But you don't have to go around in sackcloth and ashes. That's not the message.
That's not the message, yeah.
Yeah, I might add that what we know from psychological science is that state ways can change folk ways, as the kind of reasonable way of summing up the science is that if we as individuals insist that our politicians make big changes, make big decisions, we've seen that historically. If the government says you must wear a seatbelt, people start wearing seatbelts. You can't use a plastic bag, people start doing that. Then I think individually, to have real impact, we need to start insisting that our policymakers do something. So an action we can take is to push them, to nudge them, to insist, and that will probably create the biggest change, the kind of change we need. If we look at your report, I saw Dr. Bernard mention that, the economy is the dinosaur, right? That's not shifting in your report, and we're all so bound to that until someone bigger than me, all of us come together and say, you, government leaders, corporate leaders, need to shift, or I'm not buying what you make, and I'm not voting for you, and so on.
So what I'm getting from that is like we need both bottom up and top down.
Exactly. Yep.
Good.
Yeah, and I think, as consumers, if we just do a bit less of everything, all of us can make a contribution. We fly a bit less, as Terry says. We throw away less food. That's the key thing. That's a massive contribution, actually. I mean, I think in the UK, I was reading, I'm sure of the statistics, and I'm with scientists here, but there's a massive amount of food is actually just thrown away, food waste. And I think just doing a bit less of everything would help. But I have to reinforce what the others say, that I think if we go down the route of individual blame, it's not the best way. Individual responsibility is another matter.
Yep.
We have individual responsibility, each of us, to take some action. But society has the duty, and our leaders have a duty, to make frameworks which make it possible for us to take that action and affordable for people as well.
So when we talk about individuals, governments are made up of individuals, and they have their own biases and behaviours that need changing too. This might be an interesting question. So what behaviour changes can lead to real policy action?
What behavior? Sorry. I'm
Terry, you're
just,
good at this.
scoot in.
I'm just very small. Sorry, what policy actions?
Yes. So
What policy changes? Well, down, and I mean the things that in Ireland, for example, we brought in a rule about plastic bags, and we brought in a rule about smoking in public places, and people just changed their behaviour because it just wasn't. It was what you do is with the nudge theory suggests that the more social pressure there is on you to behave in a particular way, the more likely you are to do it. So if your neighbour is bringing their plastic bags to the supermarket, you're more likely to bring it to the supermarket. Or if you're not doing it and you're the only one not doing it, you become a pariah. And nobody wants to be a pariah. They want to be socially accepted. So I think if we can create situations where the kind of behaviours we want to reinforce become the norm, then people will want to follow those behaviours. And I don't think we've enough leaders setting that kind of example. So if we had leaders who said the example is that I'm not going to do this or I am going to do that, we know that punishment never doesn't stop behaviour. We know that negative reinforcement doesn't stop behaviour, but we do know that extinguishing the behaviour is the best way to stop it.
Right.
So you just kind of gradually wind it out of the system, and you keep encouraging and reinforcing the positive behaviour. That's what changes behaviour ultimately. You get it in organisations. If you're performance managed, you don't do it because someone says you're an asshole and you say you really did well at that, but could you do better at that? So that kind of encouragement is what we're looking for.
And that works with party leaders as well, would you say? Or are they more bound by?
Well, they're bound by the voter now, so if they don't get voted in. But I mean, just to take for example, that what happened over the weekend here in the United Kingdom was an MP breached the rules on lobbying, right? And he was found to have breached the rules. He was found guilty. So what the Parliament decided to do is to change the rule book rather than sanction the politician. However, what they didn't realise was the public outcry at that, so they had to back down and say, oh, we made a mistake. Because what politicians don't realise is that they're out of touch a lot of the time with the grassroots, and when they get a movement that says we don't like this, then they have to sit up and take notice. So that's why what you're doing and what we're doing together, scientists, follow the science, follow the science.
Yep.
If I might add, I think that there are probably three things that we can do at an individual level that will move policy and that have been well established in the data. I mean, we know that if you show up, politicians respond to numbers. Every one of us is a vote. And so we need to be at the table. Psychological science is trying to make an effort to be at the table and share that. No one's going to knock on our door. So anyone, whatever aspect you represent on the climate issue, knock on doors, send letters, send emails, call. The other thing is the science translation that you were just talking about. You in particular, bring together the best science on climate from top scientists across the world. That makes sense to those of us who move in those circles. We need to make that into tolerable bits that politicians can then translate into legislative to legal language and really turn it into then something that's interpretable by the public. So if we as scientists really want to help individuals get out there, we will support them knocking on doors, protesting, marching, sitting at tables. We also support them by sharing our science in a way that's digestible by the public and applicable for all of us, politicians included. If we did those three things, I think we could really move forward on the issue.
Well, they've said a lot, but
But it's all good stuff.
it's all good stuff. Yeah, I would just say that it's not just about politicians. A lot of what will happen will be through leaders of industries and leaders of technology and entrepreneurs. That's where a lot of the change is going to come. And a lot of those people, there are people who are, I won't use Terry's word exactly, but who are perhaps not helpful. But there are quite a lot of people as well, leaders who are really, they have children, they have grandchildren, they don't want to leave a legacy behind that they've fried the world. Some of them are really positive about wanting to do something constructive. We've had contact with a number of those, and I think it's important that we encourage those leaders who to step up and to keep going. There's some real encouragement to me on things like the area that I've been most encouraged up from a technological point of view has been the sustainable, the clean energy area, where it appears that solar and wind have really come down in price and constitute now 90% of installed capacity, or quite a lot of it, and also within a few years will be competitive just about everywhere with other forms of energy. So we've heard some really interesting talk on that. We've heard leaders talk on that, and we need to encourage those people and support them, and not just think they're all bad. They're the ones who will often provide the answers, I think. And it's not just politicians, it's not just individuals, it's not just communities, it's not just governments, it's actually all of us, and we can't sit there saying it's somebody else's fault. All of us have to take responsibility and stop also thinking all the time of who to blame. It's up to every one of us to do that.
Awesome. So just to wrap up quickly, because you've given me some fantastic answers, a lot of good answers. We've heard of some dates, far off dates and deadlines and pledges. What are your thoughts on 2050, 2030? What time do we need to rapidly transition away from fossil fuels, reduce emissions, and make these huge changes? Can you give a few words each, and then we'll wrap up on that important subject?
Sure. I'll keep it to a few words. If psychological science is at the table, if we are invited to talk about human factors and all of the psychologists who are doing this kind of science, and add that to the other kind of technology, energy, policy, economic work that we're all putting together, then I think 2030 could happen, could be very real change. But you have to include the human experience.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm amazed. I've been here all since last week. I'm here for 2 weeks. And I've gone around to a lot of places, and all I'm hearing about is engineering. And, it's all about people. And nothing will happen unless the people move. So the deadlines are great. I'm not going to quote some young one and say blah, blah, blah. But I think it's really not. I'm sick of hearing targets. I'd like to see some implementable, actionable plans that will bring about real change. And it's up to everybody I can't see the future. I don't know what dates. I can give you a date off the top of my head. I have no idea. But I think that unless we all commit to doing something different, then we're not going to hit the target. So I think it really is up to everybody to actually do something and to act and to change some of their long-standing habits. Because at the end of the day, a habit is a psychological phenomenon. It's not an engineering phenomenon.
Yeah. I like how you mentioned the human aspect, because those outside of the science, they sometimes perhaps forget that there's a human behind it.
Absolutely.
And their voice and their stories.
Yeah.
And that's what we try to do at Scientists Warning Europe. We represent the voice of the scientists. In fact, we've just compiled a huge list of those who have signed the planetinquiries.com Scientists Warning into Action paper, and we invite all of you to record a short video message to have your voice heard, and we're publishing that out to remind people that all these researchers, engineers, and scientists who try and enact, push forward, they have their own stories and human side to it as well, which the public and leaders hopefully can relate to and drive that action.
And one thing I would say is that psychologists are evidence-based and scientists too. I was a physicist originally,
Right.
and then I became a psychologist, and it's as rigorous in its own way. It's a younger science, but we can provide and we can encourage people to look for things which are really based on the evidence that we have and what we know. And we know quite a lot, but don't always apply it. And as for the targets, I don't think we'll hit the 2030 targets personally, but I think we'll spectacularly hit the targets by 2050 to 2060. And I think, personally, I hope I see it. I think that CO2 levels will be decreasing by eventually. I think the reasons for that are that very often it takes a long time for people really to get to a certain stage, and then the technology moves. And one last thing, Churchill said that jaw was better than war. And although this is a bit of a big talking conference, I think that jaw or blah 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 is better than war, which is the issue. We don't come together, we'll have conflict, so we have to come together on this.
Awesome. On that note, fantastic point to end on. Thank you all for your time, and I hope you enjoy. Enjoy is probably not the right word, but
We will do that as well.
We will enjoy and endure.
We're not taking fun out of climate change. There's fun here too.
Exactly. Right. Well, thank you all for your time.
Thank
See you again soon. Bye bye.